Hey everyone, and welcome back. I am Molly from the New Hampshire Department of Education, the Bureau of Student Wellness and Nutrition, and we're here today to talk about Tier 2 and MTSSB and aligning it with ABA. And I'm so excited to be joined again by Alyssa. Alyssa, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, Molly, first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Alyssa Johnson. I am a board certified behavior analyst and the director of behavioral health with Constellations Behavioral Services.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. So in thinking about Tier 2, we did kind of briefly go over this in our MTSSB overview video. Hopefully you checked that out. It's earlier in the series. But just to get everyone speaking the same language, in MTSSB, when we talk about Tier 2, we're talking about small groups, or it's usually that 15% or so of your student population that just need a little more support in accessing the Tier 1 skills. So at Tier 1, you have 100% of students learning some skill in academics. That may be a math skill or a science skill. In behavioral health, it's things like self-regulation and friendship building and executive functioning or organizational skills. And sometimes students just need a little more support building that skill, which is when we then target them for Tier 2, usually small group instruction. And we would expect, so if a student needs support with their executive function and organizational skills, we would move them into that Tier 2 small group where one adult could support a handful of students needing support. And then once they receive that support, they build the skill, we kind of fade away and those students land back just only in Tier 1 for supports. We wouldn't expect a student to live and be identified as needing Tier 2 supports and then live there forever. And same goes for any other tier. I worked with PBIS and they had a great visual of the triangle and the tiers and how students can kind of fall fluidly across them. That you could be Tier 1 for math. You could be a math whiz and really just thrive in direct instruction. But then you may need some additional supports to build up your ELA and your writing skills or your reading comprehension. So you may fall into Tier 2. And then, in terms of friendship, you can't, for whatever reason, make those personal connections and some behavioral challenges. And then you wind yourself up in potentially Tier 3, needing a bunch of adults to support your needs to meet those goals. And so the tiers, while it seems kind of static, should really be pretty fluid. Students can access the tiers, depending on their skill level for a specific area. Once a student's labeled Tier 2, they shouldn't be the Tier 2 student, because that may not be the case. They could be, above and beyond in all other categories, but just need a little support in one area. So Tier 2, like I said, it's capturing students for a moment, supporting, building their skill, fading away. And we move kiddos in and out, usually with some amount of structured data identified need. And then when they reach a piece of, some milestone, fade away. So I'm curious, how does ABA come into the play with Tier 2 and how does ABA support the MTSSB framework?
Sure. So Molly, I think one of the things that you've been highlighting right through the series, which is really fantastic for people to know and understand, is that the MTSSB model really has a lot of evidence behind it, right? And that's one of the reasons why I think ABA practitioners love MTSSB so much, because we also, in applied behavior analysis, use evidence-based structures and supports. So knowing that we can bring even more evidence to the MTSSB system is just a really exciting thing. So they really meld beautifully together. So ABA in relation to Tier 2, I don't want to say that ABA brings anything brand new that doesn't already exist within Tier 2, but what it does do is it almost provides a really nice overlay and a bolstering support to the Tier 2 strategies and structures that are typically used with the students, as you mentioned, right? So we have that small group instruction, where students are going to be working with a teacher or instructor to really hone some skill deficits across a variety of areas, depending on if that's academic or some social emotional learning skill sets, executive functioning, you name it, right? And also there's check in, check out that can be used a lot in tier 2. And that's, that opportunity for a student to work with a trusted adult, check in with them in the morning, check in the afternoon, and really talk about whether if they have goals for the day and whether they're finding that they're able to meet those goals for the day, and encouraging them throughout that process of working towards their goals. And of course, they check in with their teachers throughout the day as well. So as an overlay to those processes or those structures and supports, ABA, and this will be probably a common thread through what we talk about, brings a lot of data collection. And MTSSB really does anchor itself in data as well. And so we really try to help support the collection of data that will emphasize that students are either really thriving and learning and gaining the skills into their repertoire that they need to be successful, and potentially, like you said, fade back into tier 1, or if we're seeing stagnation, or that there's not the acquiring of skills that we would expect to see. That would indicate to us that maybe it's time to pivot and try a new strategy, or potentially provide more support. So along with data, there's other things that we can bring into the mix. I'll give one example. We recently were running a tier 2 support group at a middle school, and the students, there were nine middle schoolers in this particular group, and they were a rowdy bunch. Just to put it honestly, they're a rowdy bunch. They were very motivated to interact with each other. And so interrupting them and getting a word in edgewise was challenging. So what we ended up doing is we took a group contingency, which is a model for changing group behavior that's evidence-based and based in our science. It's called the Good Behavior Game. And we were able to apply the Good Behavior Game to that group. And once the students knew the clear expectations for group time, they knew what behaviors we were looking to see from them and which ones were not going to be acceptable. And they knew that there would be reinforcement attached to their success during the game at group time. We saw a significant decrease in challenging behavior or interfering behavior, which then allowed for more content delivery and then more skill acquisition as a result. So the group contingencies is another cool thing that we can bring to that tier 2 support. Outside of that, when we talk about check in, check out and those coaches, what the behavioral science tells us is that there's a lot of evidence behind using what we call an accountability partner. And so that check in, check out procedure is really the using of an accountability partner, someone that you can check in and say, hey, here's my goal for the day. And at the end of the day, or as you're progressing through the day, checking in with those trusted adults to say, here's how I'm doing on meeting my goal. Something that we're working to do is teaching those students who benefit from check in, check out to actually start to identify some accountability partners, but within their peer group. Mm-hmm. So as they fade from tier 2 and start to become a little bit more independent with, their self-management skills and things of that nature, that they could identify a peer or someone that they trust at their own age level or within their own social group to talk with about their goals and to check in with them and help encourage them. So I'd say that, ABA can really help bring some data collection and analysis to the game here, as well as some other evidence-based structures such as group contingencies, strong reinforcement systems, and then just kind of helping, for the generalization and the maintenance of those skills as students move forward or fade out of tier 2.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love the gamifying of some of these things. It's like, rather than this punitive kind of, nope, you're going to meet the expectation, it's really taking a positive approach to getting the expected outcome. That's fantastic.
It is. I'll also share, Molly, really quickly, a group that we were running at a high school level. It was really funny because the students very quickly identified for us that if anything we did within tier 2 group looked like or smelled like school, they didn't really want to participate. But if we used different language, So when we gave them homework assignments during the week, they didn't want to call them homework, but they wanted to call them challenges. And, they didn't want to call our meetings. They didn't want to call it like a class, like a tier 2 class or anything like that. They wanted to call it group time. But they had all these different, bits of language. They said no worksheets. Worksheets were not allowed. So we ended up doing a lot of skill acquisition and skill building with them through, role play, scenario work, just a lot of application exercises. And I think, if you saw the tier 1 video that we have presented earlier in this series, we talk a lot about the teaching of new skills. And we use that, again, that I do, we do, you do model. We don't just do that to instruct teachers on new methods of teaching. We also use that same method for teaching our students new behaviors and new skills. So we saw some really nice feedback from the students around really being able to dig their hands into the content and not just being spoken at.
You highlight a whole nother piece in complete alignment with MTSSB, which is the student engagement. I think throughout our framework, we like to weave in family engagement, student engagement and advocacy, and then obviously community partners, you being a huge community partner to the school districts. But I think more importantly, that student voice and having them be heard and kind of have ownership over their own experience. I can only imagine how impactful that must be for a student to be able to say and advocate for the way they want to learn.
Yeah, I think it was very powerful for us and for them to hear heard, like you said, and that we were able to make those adjustments for them. Hey, you don't want worksheets, or you don't want to call this class, or you don't want homework assignments. Easy shifts and changes for us to make that then help them buy in even more. And really and truly, we saw beautiful attendance and participation, I think, because the kids really felt as though they had some ownership over what we were doing together.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. What, in wrapping up this video, what is one key takeaway you would want our listeners to know about ABA and Tier 2? Sure.
I think that, since ABA is really a behavior change science, we really like to follow appropriate progression of the design of things and how things are supposed to work. And the reason I say that is because there is a somewhat of a progression with the rollout of MTSSB. And so when I talk about this progression, I'm really referring back to those tier 1 interventions and supports that a school or a district really needs to have really solid and high fidelity tier 1 practices in place before they start to try to identify who those students are that might need that next level up of tier 2 supports and services. And the reason for that being, if you're really not providing high fidelity tier 1, and you don't have all the environmental structures, the evidence-based teaching practices, the positive climate culture, all of those things in place, so that students feel really accepted and comfortable and safe and motivated to learn. If those pieces are not all in place, you might have a lot more students who are kind of bubbling up, if you will, not looking like they're doing so hot, not looking motivated to learn, not wanting to manage their own behavior, that you might think need to fall into that tier 2 support, but really with good tier 1 supports, they'd be doing just fine. So what I'm saying is, a district should really hone their efforts and their supports and resources to building beautiful high fidelity tier 1 supports and structures before they really move into tier 2. It's very fluid, like you mentioned, Molly. And, I guess it's also worth noting that those students at tier 2, if they're not showing improvement over time, might also then need a little bit of tier 3, like you mentioned before. So very, very fluid. But I think, again, everybody benefits from tier 1. So we have to make sure that those are in place very solidly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't think this is what you were saying, but just to be crystal clear, when we say something very similar in MTSSB and what we're meaning, we're not saying stop all tier 2 supports until you figure out tier 1.
Right.
We're saying, when you're thinking systematically about improving your school behavioral health and wellness structures, prioritize tier 1, recognize that tier 2 and 3 is still going to happen. Students are still going to bubble up and require supports and services. but flesh out that tier 1 first before you start moving up.
Absolutely. And I think that the student identification process, just, if you don't have high fidelity tier 1, in order to identify who needs those tier 2 supports, is just a more careful process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us again today. I look forward to the tier 3 video, and I hope people are able to post questions down below in the chat. We're hopeful that, with your audience engagement, we'll be able to come back and answer these questions with the experts. So be well and have a great day.